Hey everybody, Dr. Moose here for Muscle Monday again, and we've got a really cool one today. This is actually one of the muscles I see so commonly, so much of the time, and it presents a real big mystery to a lot of people. So we wanted to cover it today. It's actually called the Popliteus muscle. Now most of you have probably never heard of this muscle, or may have heard of it, but didn't really know where it was, what it does, anything like that. It's actually one of the most common muscles we see when we see knee issues. Now, you may be thinking somewhere on the front here, it's actually this muscle that's in the back of the knee, right back here, kind of in this whole area of the muscle, or of the knee. And what happens with this, and the reason I'm still kind of in my running clothes, is because we're out in Utah. We've been running up and down mountains, and what this muscle does is it actually allows the opening and closing of the knee. It also acts like a brake when we lock our knee out. It kind of creates that tension to lock our knee out and also bend our knees. So a lot of times what we will see is when people injure this is when they're actually doing some downhill running, because they're constantly basically overstretching that muscle, trying to brake as they're going downhill. So if you're on a hilly course where you're going up or down, that can be a big issue, where you're doing something where you have a hyperextension injury of the knee. That can actually injure that muscle. Now, what else we actually see with this a lot is I always joke after Thanksgiving, all I do is fix popliteuses and shoulders and anterior deltoids. Because in Chinese medicine, the popliteus is actually related to our gallbladder. So now if you're sitting around going, well, I don't really run up and down hills, but man, my knees are so stiff, sore, achy all the time, especially when I get out of bed in the morning, or when I haven't been moving, and it's like, oh man, I gotta like warm them up and get them moving. It may be because there's some dysfunction in the gallbladder. Now, the gallbladder is an organ that oftentimes in traditional medicine is kind of considered like non-essential. And so if you start having problems with it, they'll actually just cut it out and take it out if you start having pain in that area. But it actually has a ton of functions associated with it. One of the main things that it does is it actually houses bile. And bile is actually essential for two things. More than that, but really two main things, is it helps us to absorb and package our fats so our body can absorb and process our fats correctly. So if we're having trouble with our gallbladder, we may be having trouble with some gas, bloating, distension, those kind of things, because we're not able to process and digest fat correctly. It can lead to constipation if the bile is not flowing correctly, because the bile is actually lubricant for the intestines. It allows things to move through. And so some of the things that typically will, affect like our bile flow is bile is produced in the liver. It's concentrated in the gallbladder. So if we don't have a gallbladder, or we have gallbladder dysfunction, we can't concentrate our bile enough to work in this digestive process of helping us to break down and process our fats correctly. So if you've got dry skin, flaky scalp, dry hair, that actually may be a sign that you have some type of gallbladder dysfunction. And now if you eat and you get gas, bloating, distension, and you just feel like your stomach is out to here, if you have some pain up in the upper right hand underneath your right rib cage, that can also be an issue. Another thing that I use to analyze this when we have knee pain, there's 3 points I always like to rub on people to see if they're sore, to see if there may be some gallbladder meridian involvement with that. And that's right here in the web of the right hand, this point right back here in the right shoulder, and then between the between the fourth and fifth toe on the gallbladder meridian, it actually goes between the fourth and fifth toe. You can actually just squeeze right in here, right up in, so go up from the toes and go right in there and squeeze them there. Now, if those 3 points are tender, and sometimes when you do them on yourself, they're not that tender, and oftentimes when you do, they are, but if you have like a spouse, a friend, somebody rub those on you and they're really tender, then there may be some dysfunction in your gallbladder. So, what can we do to kind of help the gallbladder? So, interesting thing in Chinese medicine is the gallbladder is related to anger, frustration, and resentment. So oftentimes when those start to get bound up, we can deal with just not being able to process out these frustrations and resentment and anger, and we just kind of get stuck. And that's kind of what you see too with the bowels as well when the gallbladder is involved, is everything's just stuck and bound up inside, and typically it'll just kind of come rushing out at the wrong time. And so what we can do is we can support that nutritionally with things. One of the best things that you can actually do for your gallbladder is actually beetroot juice, powdered in beets. So whole beets and beetroot juice have a lot of methyl donors and serine, which actually helps to thin the bile and make the bile flow correctly. Now, eating the right kinds of fats, your omega-3s, cold pressed oils, those kind of things like that are very, very important in establishing good biliary flow. Sugar actually will thicken up the bile. So if we're eating too much sugar and refined carbohydrates, it can actually thicken the bile and create a thicker bile. And so processed food kind of has that that effect on the body. If we're eating, too many cooked oils from like pastries, cookies, chips, processed food, that oxidized oil, the gallbladder has to work on that, and it actually creates an inflammation in the liver and the gallbladder, which then kind of thickens up the bile. Other things to focus on for good bile flow is vitamin A, the amino acid taurine, an enzyme called lipase, which also helps us to digest fat. So lipase is the enzyme that helps us to break down and digest fat. Also, so some other things is some people may be deficient in bile salts if they've actually eaten a highly processed food diet. Their gallbladder may have actually, there's a component of bile called bile salts that's kind of the precursor to that, and if we don't have enough of those, we just can't make enough bile, period. And so oftentimes we may need to supplement in with a little bit of bile salts to kind of give our bodies the precursors for that as we do some cleaning up in the liver with herbs like milk thistle, dandelion root, burdock, yellow dock are all great herbs that can help to kind of detox and cleanse the liver. We also need our sulfur-containing amino acids, our methylated B vitamins, a lot of those things. N-acetylcysteine is another good one. And taurine are all good amino acids that actually help to make sure that our gallbladder is functioning correctly. So the sulfur-containing amino acids are cysteine, N-acetylcysteine, methionine. So those are all good ones to look for as well. You can really get those from eating good quality, healthy animals, that are pasture raised, no hormones, no additives, those kind of things. So, basically free range animals that have been allowed to move. The animal tissue actually has really good sulfur-containing amino acids in them. And then making sure that you're getting enough greens and those kind of things to make sure everything's moving as well too. So those are some things that we can do for, to support this from a nutritional standpoint. Also from the emotional standpoint, looking at like unresolved anger, resentment, frustration can lock us up too. So we want to make sure that we're working on those as well. So really one of my favorite things, we see it so much of the time, sometimes just from an injury standpoint, other times there's actually some more metabolic components that are going on with this when we see, even in the arthritic knee, oftentimes it can be related to the gallbladder meridian. So definitely something to take into consideration if you wake up in the morning and you're stiff or you're struggling with that. It actually may be the muscle in the back of the knee. Instead of doing all this work with all these other areas, that's one of the most common places that we see issues with knee. So just wanted to get that information out to you. Keep following us, and we'll see y'all again next Monday.